In today's exercise, we're going to paint a water droplet, but first I want to talk about how to use a limited palette to create dark neutral colors that look almost black. This palette has titanium white, lemon yellow, yellow ochre, raw umber, which is in the yellow family, sap green, terra verde, phthalo blue, and alizarin crimson. These are all the colors I've used so far in the landscape painting, but we won't use all these colors today. I'm not a fan of black. Black can make a painting feel muddy and heavy. If I need a color that's similar to black, what I'll do is mix the three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, and I'll use the darkest version of each. So what I'm going to do here is use raw umber, which again is in the yellow family, phthalo blue, and alizarin crimson. And I'm using roughly equal parts of these three colors, and the result is a color that is very nearly black. If I add white to this very black color, of course I get a gray. Now this gray is very blue in cast. So if I want the gray to be less blue, less cool, then I may add the other two primaries. Remember, red, yellow, and blue are the three primary colors, so to make this less blue, I can add my yellow or umber and my alizarin crimson or red. Now this gray is very purple. Opposite purple on the color wheel is yellow, so to make it less purple, I can add my umber. And now I have a very warm neutral. So you can see the complexity and the variation when you use primary colors to mix your dark neutrals. It gives your painting much more depth and interest. Now we'll use this limited palette to paint a water droplet. As reference, we're using a photograph by a photographer named D. Sharon Pruitt, and she's given permission for us to use this photograph as reference. I've begun by making a very basic sketch of the photograph, and now I'm going to work from light to dark. I'm going to be using three different brushes. I'll use a round number 4. I'll use a little liner brush. This is a 00 liner brush. And then I'm going to use, I need a flat or a bright, something that will move a lot of paint at once. And the larger brush is the one I'm going to start with. I'm going to mix some lemon yellow. I want to work from light to dark. So I'm mixing some lemon yellow and some sap green. Lots of lemon yellow, and I'm putting some liquid medium in this color. I'm also adding just a tiny bit of titanium white in order to make it a little bit less see-through. And now I'm going to just really fill in a lot of this area. I'm working quickly here since this is just a learning exercise. These exercises are designed to give you insight into your materials, allow you to try some new things without getting too attached to the result. So you can loosen up just a little bit in these exercises. So I'm just looking to see where this light green color shows up on in my reference picture. Mixing a little bit more with lemon yellow, sap green, and the tiniest little bit of titanium white. I'm using oils almost like watercolor here, very, very transparent layers. I'm not worried about being too light, I'm more worried about being too dark, because it's much easier to lighten a dark color, it's much easier to darken a light color than it is to lighten a color that you get too dark. Now I'm going to move to a slightly darker value with a little bit more sap green, tiny little bit of that dark neutral that I just mixed, and I'm getting most of the paint off my brush onto my palette or a napkin, and then I'm just going to come in and with a tiny amount of paint on the brush fill in a few of those dark values. Now I want to leave my veins in the leaf light, so this is sort of a negative painting process. I want to leave the light areas. I'm not going to try to come back and paint them back in with an opaque light color, so I want to leave those light values as light as possible, and again, this is a lot like a watercolor technique. And the reference photograph has lots of tiny little water droplets, but I don't want to put all those in. I'm just interested in this large water droplet because I just want to get a little bit of insight into painting water droplets and using contrast and sharp edges. Those are the skills I want to build today. Contrast, sharp edges, and insight into the way that light behaves in a drop of water. Not getting too caught up in tiny details, but I do want to pay attention and have something that looks fairly realistic. Now inside that water droplet, I'm going to develop some slightly darker values. And I'll revisit this area and build up more dark. Notice the vein underneath is magnified a little bit by the water droplet. It goes through here, and we want to make sure that we observe that value change, and that's all it is a value change. I've only used 4 colors so far. Now I'm going to add another layer of darker value above the water drop, and I'm using the dark neutral that I mixed along with more sap green. These dark values are going to provide a contrast and really push that water droplet out. So we want to develop them as much as possible. We don't want to go too dark because we don't want to end up with something that looks plastic. And notice how I'm painting with just the tiniest amount of paint on my brush, and that gives me greater control, and it also allows me to really just spread the paint out and get really soft edges. That's already starting to look a little bit three-dimensional, but it's got a long way to go. I'm going to switch brushes. I'm going to pick up my liner brush, and I'm going to come back with some detail and use this liner brush to create some sharp edges. I want the viewer to focus on this little water drop, so I want the edges to be really well defined and sharp. This brush is getting old, so it's not going to cooperate as nicely as a new liner brush would, but that's okay. What I've lost in using an older brush is the softness. Sometimes an older brush can be an advantage, like when I was doing the leaf behind the water drop and using an older brush, the bristles were a little frayed and I was able to get nice soft edges with those frayed bristles. But for detail work, a new brush is a good thing. I'm going to add a little bit more titanium white into this lemon yellow. There's a little sap green still in my brush. So I'm brightening some of the lights. And then I'm going to use this same brush and I'm going to darken some of the darks. The lights won't look as light as they should until we get those darks in there. And that's what I'm going to do next. I'm coming back to my dark neutral with some liquid and some more sap green, because it's a very green shadow over here. And this, I'm being very careful with my liner brush so that I can get sharp edges, barely touching the edge of the paintbrush to the panel. I want a very sharp edge beside my water droplet, and then I'm going to soften the other side. And notice how this dark value immediately pushes the light colored water droplet out and makes it look three-dimensional. I want to make sure I have enough paint on the panel. And then I'm going to come in with a dry brush. I've just wiped my brush on a paper towel, and with that dry, soft brush, it's important that this brush is soft. I'm going to just pull that edge out. Pulled it out a little too far there. So I'll push it back in some. Spread it out really, really thin. It's not quite dark enough up here. So I'm going to repeat the process. Again, I want to develop those dark values as much as possible. Okay, and now a little bit more down here. And then inside the water droplet, there is some contrast. Everything's just really magnified. So the lights are a little lighter inside the water droplet. The darks are a little darker. You kind of get that fisheye effect. Now it gets a little greener toward the center, so I still have some of that dark neutral in my brush, but I'm also adding some sap green, a little liquid. These are not quite as dark the values as we were using a minute ago. A little bit greener, a little bit lighter in value. And we're going to paint in a subtractive way around that vein to get it to stand out. Back again with my soft brush so that I can get those textures just like I want them before I'm finished. Now I could keep working on this for a little while. I see one more little detail I want to add before I'm finished. I'm going to add just a teensy little highlight over here. I'm using a fairly thick paint, titanium white and lemon yellow. Lemon yellow is the perfect color for this with some sap green, but it's so transparent that it needs just a little bit of titanium white to really show up. And now, just a tiny little highlight just to separate that edge. Another little highlight up here. And I think I'm going to call it finished. Again, the reference picture that we used for this little exercise was from a photographer named D. Sharon Pruitt, and we very much appreciate her allowing us to use it. Have fun. See you next time.